So, good evening, dear friends, dear viewers, dear listeners. We've promised you that we will talk to you in English and to ourselves in English, so we'll keep our promise. And tonight, this evening, a very interesting discussion awaits us because, the topic is the following: identity politics and identity policies in divided societies, a changing agenda. So, this is a very important topic, a very, well, even crucial, maybe, in this time. So, we are happy and honored that we are able to talk about this a very, very important topic with the vice director of the Primakov Institute of World Economy and International Relations, Irina Semenenko. Irina Stanislavovna, good evening.
Evening.
But before we will continue to the discussion itself, I would like to thank Vera Bunina, who is the director of our Russian Center in Brussels, for joining us here. And I would like to pass the floor to Vera Bunina for a couple of welcoming words. Vera Georgievna.
Thank you so much, Vitaly. Irina, it's our pleasure to welcome you today on our discussion platform. And I remember very well that in last June, you were one of the speakers of our dialogue expert discussion platform, European Meridian 21. And we were very happy to listen to you speaking about the divided societies, the divided world. And you told in your speech that there are big divisions that have ousted class divisions and ideological divisions firstly. So it was in last June, and thank you very much for joining us today for your personal speech and personal participation in the special dialogue event dedicated to you. And my first question and first thing I would like to ask you is, do you think that our divided societies are even more divided now in October, more divided than in June were? Because when we were speaking in June, we were thinking that the pandemic was almost over already. And there will be something better in our life and some better processes in our societies. So what can we tell now about it? And if the divisions that you mentioned in June became even bigger now?
So thank you, colleagues. My pleasure to be here and to present on a topic that we've been researching a lot on at the Primakov National Research Institute of World Economy and International Relations of the Russian Academy of Sciences. I think that we can start from a very good point. You're a connecting point. So your platform has a very sort of interesting approach to presenting people and ideas, because and I think it's very important to see this platform and other discussion platforms as connecting points, because what we lack in this world is connectivity. On the one hand, we have a lot of that because we have social media, we have all sorts of possibilities to interconnect in networks. On the other hand, like you were saying, Vera, we are losing touch with one another because there's a lot of social alienation around. And this has happened not only during the pandemic, but because there's been a resurgence of individualism over the past decades. And we were always of the opinion that the pandemic only exacerbated some of the trends that were present. And one of these dangerous trends is alienation between people, alienation between ideas, and the loss of the value of dialogue. So connectivity, yes, we have a lot of that. And there's a huge amount of literature on connectivity, interconnection, but connectivity and the need for dialogue and the need to listen to each other, these are different things. So my idea today was to present some views and points on how our societies can be rethought today, and how identity comes into this agenda, and what can be probably what we can suggest in terms of promoting dialogue, because this is the main idea behind the study of divided societies and behind the study of identity. So first thing, this idea of divided societies, it's not my idea. It has emerged in the late 60s, and we have classical authors in the social sciences, Stein Lacan and Seymour Lipset, who wrote a cornerstone book published in 1967. Their main idea, I won't go much into that because people who are interested would know, or can come up with it in the internet. But the main point was that divisions persisted in Western societies and in non-Western societies, but mostly in Western societies. And these divisions gave the floor for party and political partisanship in societies. And this has been going on all over the 20th century. And in the 60s, when they were writing this book, there were still class divisions, and there still are. There were divisions between the church and the state. There were divisions between the owners of property and those who had nothing, etc., etc., etc. But the main idea that I like about this work and about their ideas, was that they put forward a thought that I think is very, very important today. It's about the cumulative effect of these divisions. Because over the years, over the decades, and we're living 50 years after this, these ideas were presented, new divisions have emerged. And one of the main ones is about the digital divide, or the digital gap. This doesn't only mean inequality. It means, digital inequality. Because although it is present, and it's present in different societies, probably to a different extent, but it still is there, there are also divisions on a grander scale between people who can profit or who can live with what globalization has to offer, and those who are completely alienated from this and from the possibilities that interconnection between people, between societies, and between ideas can give. And it is also a division between people who are mostly set on consumer society's values, and people whose post-material values are more important for them. And this is a huge division that has been studied in all sorts of comparative value surveys across Europe and across the world. And material and post-material division is only the upper part of the iceberg. It actually means that for some people, values, non-material values, and values of, like I was saying, dialogue, values of solidarity, are more important. And for other people, well, probably because my idea is not to judge people. That's not the point. The point is that people see material things as being the of prior importance. And this is all about consumer society and what consumer society has to offer and what it can't offer. Because I'll only give one example. Over the past 20 years, one of the main ecological shifts has been because there was a huge number of people who have moved from the countryside to the urban into urban communities. And when Lacan and Lipset were writing this book, they were talking about the rural-urban divide, but they were not speaking about the material consequences of this. For example, 300 million cars that has been produced and used by, say, in a country like China is a very important point to make. I've been there last year before the pandemic, and I can see that, well, it's a place that has changed immensely over the years, but this change has brought about ecological problems, ecological devastation. So whether these values are important or whether other values are important, That's the main point that divided societies face today. So this value gap between generations, between people who have access and who have no access to the possibilities of creative, say, economics, is one thing. There is also a huge territorial divide. I'm not only speaking about South and North. That's an obvious thing, but I'm also speaking about divides between within countries, even within societies that are well-to-do, like the one that you're in, for example, at the moment, I mean, Belgium, or the Russian societies where there are big inequalities between the regions. This concerns not only the non-Western world, but also the Western world today. So that's one point. Another point is that there's been scholars have been speaking a lot about a crisis of identities that these divided societies have produced. And this crisis of identities is something that some people see as produced by identity politics. That's why I took up the topic of identity politics and identity policies, because I wanted to point out that these days, when identities have come to the forefront of contemplating how we live, on contemplating where people belong, on contemplating how emotionally people are linked with each other, it is quite obvious that identities can be used for different political means and for political mobilization. And they can be used to deepen these divides. This is the main point. They can be used to deepen these divides, and the identity politics that in the American political science have been contemplated as something, as politics that have been promoted by minor groups, by minority groups, who address the state in their struggle for identity and for their identity rights. That's only part of the problem. Another big part of the problem is that any society, whether it promotes an ideology or whether it does not promote any ideology, I mean officially, always promotes identity politics because it wants to uphold a cohesive society. And that means forming people's identities. In what sense? It can be an inclusive policy, or it can be an exclusive policy. So in multicultural societies, we're speaking about inclusion, but we're also speaking about the problems that multicultural societies face because of tense communities and things you, I'm sure, know very much about. But how do you overcome this problem? What can be done? Included in deeply divided societies, a concept I have not touched upon yet, but it is a society where divisions are institutionalized. For example, Northern Ireland. For example, South Africa, to a certain extent, and they're trying to overcome this through consociational means. I mean, by letting groups take part and empowering groups, and by letting groups take part in government. How do you overcome these divisions? What can be done? I think that what can be done actually is to promote an inclusive identity policy, which means working on different levels, including education, which is the very, very main and key point here, but also working on the level of memory politics, which is something that divides societies today and divides us to an extent that something has to be done about it. You know all about cultural wars. If we have a question about this, and I'll take my time and speak about it. But memory politics, also language policies, which can be divisive or can be inclusive, and symbolic politics. For example, we have been studying cases in Northern Ireland, in South Tyrol, and in Romania, in Transylvania, and we have seen different policies of including minority groups into the overall society pattern, in promoting dialogue. Whether this can be a consistent identity politics or not depends on what the state chooses, but also on what groups apart from the state take part in promoting these identities. And by groups, I mean professional groups, expert groups, which is very important to say for the COVID pandemic, because experts can divide, but they can also promote a common understanding of what we're up to now, of the difficulties we're living through. And for example, the example of expert activities in Greece, say, in Britain, and I don't know much about Belgium at this point, but Greece and Britain are sort of very different approaches, because in Greece the expert community has done quite a lot to promote dialogue. So that was a good idea in terms of what experts can do. So including the state, NGOs, expert communities, professionals involved in identity politics, including the educational profession, creative industries, which are very important because they promote cultural symbols that can be divisive or not, and businesses. Whether there is, if there is this interaction, that what can be done is moving forward to promote dialogue, to promote inclusive identities, or to promote exclusive identities. So the idea that I was speaking about last June was that there's a huge need for a paradigm shift, and the pandemic has shown that this need is probably more than even more acute than we've been contemplating before. But whether this paradigm shift will take place, that's a huge question, because it depends on whether people can act responsibly, including and to a very big extent in promoting identities, whether trust and dialogue can be upheld or not, and whether solidarity is a value that society divides, or whether it's a value that is not actualized in what we call a mass consciousness or in identities. That's the main point. And I think that this paradigm shift is not that much about sustainability, because sustainability is how it is done, but it is more about responsibility. I mean, what people are prepared to do to promote this paradigm shift. And I think that the pandemic has only shown that it's a huge problem. Dialogue is a huge problem. There's a big need for international cooperation, which we don't see at the moment. If you ask me whether, and I'm finishing at this point because I've taken quite a lot of time. If you ask me whether these new inequalities can be overcome, I think that the main what we can expect today is to see a movement, a trend of overcoming these inequalities. If we see this, then we see that development is moving in the right direction. And that society, this or that society, whether it be national society, regional society, or the like, has a development agenda. And I think that in the near future, we're going to see a competition between states and nations who have development agendas and those who lag behind. And the leaders are going to be the ones who have these development agendas. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Irina Stanislavovna. I would like to ask a question that I find very important. When we are talking about societies which are divided, what exactly are we talking about? We are talking about a country, or we are talking about region? What's the core of this society, which has to be taken into consideration?
Usually the point is that what you're actually talking about, and it's a good question, is whether it's a nation, a nation state, whether it's a community.
Yeah,
So it can be on
exactly.
different. It can be on different levels. The point is that political scholars are trying to do their best to overcome what Ulrich Beck, one of the late German scholars, called methodological nationalism, which means that concentrating only on the national level is not a good idea, because this means that there are going to be borders, and these borders have to be overcome because divisions are transnational, and digital inequalities are transnational, and the digital gap, not even the divide, but the gap, it's transnational, because there are, I won't go into this, but this is quite evident. So it's actually on all the levels where there are cohesive communities. And when commenting on this, I can say, for example, that we've been taking up, we've been doing just recently a study in the Krasnodar region on developing rural communities in this region. But what we actually did was to take pairs of rural communities, one that was successful and the other that was not successful, but with more or less the same parameters. I mean, living 20 or 30 kilometers apart. And we were trying to understand what was the driver of this success. But we were doing this not from the economic point of view. Of course, economy is very important here. I mean, whether they are involved into whether they have an economic niche or not. This is very important. But what is also very important is what identity they hold. For example, there was this very, very successful rural community where groups of different ethnic groups lived side by side. And one of the groups that was very much integrated into this rural community in Krasnodar was the Meskhetian Turks. Now, you would have this negative idea of these people being all sorts of protests, building up all sorts of protests and that sort of thing. But this is not the only point. These people were very much integrated, and this integration, this interaction between different ethnic groups, different religions in this rural community, and they're upholding their identity as being a local identity, which was important for them, this particular rural place to which they all belonged. And identity is not only about belonging. It would be superfluous to use this term if it was a concept, if it was only about belonging. It's also about being emotionally involved. That's it. It's not just that. And all these people were emotionally involved. So they had this museum, they had a church, they had the Orthodox Church there, they had this other religious community there, they had a school with all sorts of activities there. And they had public spaces which they all used, and they held festivities together. So we were into this. We interviewed these people, and we saw that it was very important, promoting a common local identity. And this can be done through different means, but positive means, because what they actually had was a sense of the future. And whereas 20 kilometers apart, there was this other place with basically the same, more or less the same outline, but everybody wanted to leave, see?
Mm-hmm.
So they had no sense of the future. That's it.
Yes, I understand this sense of community, but from the state point of view, from the scientific point of view. So I understood that this community was strongly integrated within itself. But the members of this community, how were they feeling themselves? They were feeling themselves as member of a community or as citizens of a state.
Now, this does not, there's no contradiction between these identities. It's like identity formation is like Russian doll, the matryoshka. So it's one, you put one into the other end. But this is not my idea. I mean, it's been circulating for ages, this idea. Some people think that if you hold this national identity, then a local identity means nothing to you. That's not the point. At some point, it's more important to be locally emotionally involved. At other points, it's important to be involved as a citizen. And these people who were active in their community were also had a sense of citizenship. See, so usually it's this way. They're complementary. They're not contradictory. And usually political identity is, I'm a scholar of political identities. So political identity is an overlapping and sort of a rainbow archway thing or an umbrella thing. And it involves partly national identity, it involves local identity, it involves professional identity. It's not only about belonging, say, to a party. You don't have to belong to a political party to have a political identity. See? So, say, the Western scholars, they don't speak that much about civic identity. We do, because we think that civic involvement is an important part of civic identity. It's not only about, say, taking part in activities. It's about the willingness to be involved. That's it. And these people were willing to be involved. And this was a Russian example. I took it up because we were doing this study and we've just finished it. But I can give you an example from a community in Cyprus, on the borderline between the two communities, where there was the same idea, and whereas there were huge contradictions between the Turkish and there are between the Greek community. But this place, Patami, I think it's called. It's a place where not only people lived in peace, but where they're interacting, with their intermarriages and things that promote development. And the same can be said, say, for what is going on in Northern Ireland. On the one hand, there are huge differences still, and the walls still exist in Belfast. You know, the walls that divide these communities. I mean, the material walls, not just the mental walls, but the material walls, they're still there. So people tend to socialize more than they used to, and your generation socializes much more than my generation does in Northern Ireland and in Belfast. But the wall is still there. And what can be done to knock it down? One thing is promoting all sorts of cultural policies. I was speaking about language politics. People who hold who are English speakers and who have a basically English or British identity are involved in teaching the Gaelic language to other English speakers. They're small examples, but you have to start with this sort of thing. The 2011 British Census first put forward the questions on what is your identity. And these identities could overlap. So you could choose English and British, Scottish and British, and the like. What you could not choose is when you had the second question, what is your ethnic group? In ethnic group, you could choose only one. Whereas in identity, you could choose two, and some people chose three. So that's it.
Yes, well, it's easier to talk about small countries, small communities like Cyprus, where not well, it's not a big country, not a lot of people living there. But when we're speaking about big countries, divided countries like Russia, where there are a lot of nationalities, a lot of people, a lot of space between regions, and Belgium too. We have. Flanders, we have Wallonia, we have Brussels. So people are divided here too. So uh, isn't there a contradiction? So when a man who lives in Wallonia, for example, he feels himself as citizen of Wallonia, not citizen of Belgium. So is it more important for a person to consider himself a member of a local community or the citizen of the whole state? And yeah, is it possible to make people feel more related to their country than to
Yes,
their small community?
yeah, I got your point, but it's probably not a question of importance. It's a question of willingness and whether people want to live in this community or whether they want to secede. Now, if you take Catalonia, you have this example, but it's not that all the Catalonians voted for secession. That's the point. A big part of them did, and another part did not. And this conflict, which is sometimes comes to the surface and sometimes sort of boils down, doesn't have any at this point, well, it's not gone very far in the sense that they're trying to work out some kind of balance, and they've not succeeded in achieving this balance. Probably this is the point Belgium is at the moment, because this balance is something that was very, very difficult to achieve. You have to keep it up all the time, and this is what identity policies are about. If you want to keep a state which is, say, multicultural, like we in Russia say, multinational, you have to promote very consistent identity policies. But like I was saying, when it turns hierarchical, only from up down, it becomes a very difficult thing to keep a balance. So my idea was that identity policies in their performance have to include very different actors, including ethnic communities, so who have to come into interaction at the local level, say, with the local authorities, with the state authorities, with the educational authorities, and the like. But this is a balance that has to be kept all the time. See, otherwise, if you don't keep this balance, what you get is political mobilization of groups like the aforesaid Meskhetins, and what happens, or any other. This is just an example. And what you then have is ethnic or ethno-national conflicts. And what you then have is deeply divided societies, which is a concept in its own right. Like I was saying, these divisions in deeply divided societies are institutionalized. Now, if you take South Tyrol, for example, I've been there for quite some time to see what was going on there. And South Tyrol, for example, is seen as a success story at this stage. What actually happened there was that after the war, it was a very poor region. Now it's first, second place in GDP in Italy. And the point is that neither Austria wants South Tyrol to secede to it, nor do the South Tyroleans these days. I mean, mostly the majority of the population don't want that. But it was not the case 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when there was lots of terrorism around and that sort of thing. Now, what happened? Language policies, consociational democracy, I can't dwell on that much. But it was a consistent policy towards promoting inclusive identities there, but also giving a lot of economic independence to this region. So independence in the budget, independence in what they did with their money there on the local level. And one of the things that they did do was to promote the German language. And Italian people who live there take up German as their first language because it gives them lots of possibilities. That's the thing. But I'm not saying that it's for sure for good and for all times. It has to be a consistent policy all the time. That's the point.
How does the globalization and the new high technologies influence this identity? Well, um, the feeling of identity. So right now, it's so easy to communicate with the whole world. You can sit in front of your computer, or even you can have your smartphone. You can communicate with the whole world. So the world is becoming smaller and
a
smaller.
A global village.
Yes, exactly. How does this influence the identity?
You mean generally identities or these divisions?
Well, everything, because I still can't understand which one is more important, the identity as a whole or this small divisions.
It makes identities more flexible. They're in flux all the time, so they're changing. And this is the point, the general point that you can always make because when people interact, of course they tend to get to know each other better. But having said that, we were speaking about alienation before, and the pandemic has given a thrust to this alienation process. So does the internet make us trust each other more? That's the point. See, I'm not sure. So it has to be a consistent or uh, work, labor, not only work, labor, to overcome these divisions that the digital divide also provides. I think that it's about what you're actually speaking about connectivity, but you're also speaking about identity in flux, because today I can be this, and tomorrow I can be this other, and I can use this nick to become this third person. Whether it's good for you or whether it's good for your identity, I can't say. So this depends on the moral choice of the person. So it brings us down to the individual. And the individual is overcoming this methodological nationalism also means, when you come down to it, to including the individual into this process and to including the responsibility of the individual. So my idea was that there has to be an ethic turn in social studies, and there has to be an ethic turn in politics. But having said this, it's easy to say. But in social studies, this is quite this is something that can be achieved, and probably we can promote this agenda. I'm not saying that we can make the turn, but we can promote this agenda of ethics and moral choices being important, because in the age of connectivity you're speaking about, we're responsible not only for ourselves and not only for our choices.
But what do you think? Will we see the time when someone begins calling themselves citizen of the world? Or is this just an utopia, just a dream, or maybe even a bad dream?
No. There's been a lot of talk about this, and that's about cosmopolitan identity, global identity, and the like. The movement between people in the COVID pandemic has ceased. Well, not quite, but still. And we're going to see a change in these fluxes, trans-border movements. So probably they're going to be less. So in this sense, we're going to see some people who adhere to this global identity idea probably they won't be as important as they used to be, because they're upheld by movement, and they're upheld not only by movement of physical movement, but movement within the internet and the like. But still, cosmopolitan identity is something very, very difficult to pin down. What does it actually mean? So I wouldn't say cosmopolitan. I mean, what I would say is that we're responsible as human beings for each other, and for what we say and for what we do. So if we promote dialogue, if we promote values that are important, solidarity values, that whatever your creed, whatever your choice, are important for everybody, then I think this would make us responsible. And in this sense, it's about it brings back the point of an inclusive identity. Inclusive or exclusive, because basically why I was making this point is that basically the idea of identity is exclusive, because I am not like this other one. I am like this person, but I'm not like this other person. But what is more important, like you were saying, whether I'm like this one, whether I'm not like this one. Identity is about this.
As I can see it, most of modern problems, the global challenges that we're facing, uh, they have two main reactions. One is we have to be more open to the world. We have to help each other and overcome these problems, these challenges. And the second one, which I think is stronger, is we have to divide ourselves. We have to protect ourselves by closing up, by closing our borders, because it's easier to deal with problems by ourselves. What do you think? Which strategy is better, and which one will prevail?
Depends on the agenda, of course, but you can't close down to epidemics. You can't close down to other global risks. You can't close down to climate change. So whether you want it or not, you can't do it. So it's a question of whether there'll be a shift towards more listening to each other, more cooperation, and more common choices, or whether it'll be more closing up, and this will come into contradiction. So In some points, of course, it's inevitable in some points, but basically it's not possible. Otherwise, what you get is that your problems come to contradicts the problems of your neighbor, and what you have in the long run is either transborder conflict or movement of people that has been stopped or whatever, and human tragedies. So, of course, it's a question of agenda, but it's a question of agenda for development, I think. And I don't think that the world can close down. A small country, maybe, but even that, I don't see how that can be actually done with the global risks that we are facing, and with the common agenda that we are facing.
And how to promote responsibility? How is it possible? What can be done for responsibility to be promoted worldwide and in small communities at the same?
I think what can be done is to, first of all, is that we can well promote this idea that it is important for whom we're responsible, for ourselves, and to whom we're responsible. We're responsible, say, to nature. Some people think that this is the priority. Other people see God as the main level of responsibility, so they're responsible as believers, and this is very important. And it's a question of promoting a responsible agenda. So it's when you ask we, if you mean, say, the expert community, what can be done is to promote the idea of responsibility and what responsible moves can be taken in policies. That's it. So, for example, I don't think that well, the study of hate speech, however important it is, can be well. The importance it is given these days. I can't say it's exaggerated because there's lots of hate speech, but probably we can promote a positive study of, say, dialogue and values of dialogue. And I would vote for this. A dialogue between say, people of different religions, between people of different ethnic groups, between people of different political ideas. So it's a question of promoting this agenda, right?
Anti-globalists say that if the world becomes too small, we will lose our own national identity, and we will become, well, I don't even know who will become if we lose our national identity. Is it even possible? Is it possible that some person completely loses its nation?
Oh yes, there are. It's not a question of loss; it's a question of whether it's important or not. If a person says it's not important for him, it doesn't mean that he has lost it. But into what system of coordinates does a person put himself? I don't think that national identity can be lost if traditions are kept and if we have a balance between tradition and innovation. It's not a question of loss. It's a question of what you put into nation, nationality, and national identity, cultural roots. I think these will always be important for people, but well, there are, of course, very many people who say that, say, traditions are not that important. What I think is important is to see that people who are, say, against tradition have a right in their own say. But there are other people who want this tradition to be there. So we have to find this balance. It's always a question of balance. It's not a question of loss, I don't think. When the borders are gone, but I don't think we're going to live to see this. When the borders are gone, probably we are going to see some transnational culture, but transnational culture is rooted into traditions. And whether you call it national or not, it can be regional or whatever. But say European identity, is it a myth or is it something that is there? How important is it for European people? People who are interested in culture, for them it might be important, even if they don't think about it being European. It's just there. It's part of them. I think it's more a question of taking in cultural values, whether culture is a value, whether humanitarian values are values, or whether it's this brings us back to consumerism, or whether it's solely consumerism. I'm exaggerating a bit, but that's the dilemma.
Uh, when do we receive our national identity? When and where? At what age and where is it formed? At school, at home, at playground, or how how is it?
Well, I would tell you, for many people, like you were saying before, national identity is not an important point. So they probably have it, but it's not like they think about it all the time. If you move from one country to another, does it mean that you lose your national identity, or that you'll become a binational? Well, some people are. So, say people who come, British Pakistani citizens. What is more important for people like that? We have this notion of, say, double or triple or whatever identity, but mechanisms of its formation are it's about acculturation. Sociologists speak in these terms. So when a person appropriates a certain culture, he appropriates an identity. Whether he calls it national or not, that's the second point. Catalonia, is it national? Catalonians who are for secession say it is. Huh? But the people out of Catalonia who are against secession say it's regional. So what is it actually?
When does it happen? At what age? You have to, well, you can have only one identity. So if you are born in Russia, you will feel yourself Russian your whole life,
Oh
or
no, no, no. Oh, why? What if you're a Russian Tatar? What happens then? So it depends on when your identity is actually when you're using it. Say if you move out of Russia, probably you won't feel that much of being a Tatar. But some people might contradict me and say, no, I'm always a Tatar, and that's my first identity. In opinion polls in Russia, all Russian identity has been growing over the years, but that doesn't mean that other identities are not important for people. That's it. So when identities come to the forefront, when a person contemplates his own belonging and emotion state in these terms. So if you ask me, I'll ask you a question back, which like this, for example, were there identities in ancient Rome, which was an empire? Well, people didn't think about it in those terms. But we had a study about, say, Roman and Greek societies and their identities looking back forward, which we call retrospective. And of course, you can conceptualize in these terms. But again, identity is a concept. It's a notion. You can't reify it. It's not something material. That's what I mean. You can't sort of pin it down.
yes, speaking about history, as far as I remember, in the Russian Empire, identity was formed on belief. So if you are Orthodox Christian, then you are Russian. And now our identity is formed on our nation.
Yes, but we also had Muslims in the empire, and Buddhists, for example, and whatever. And yes, religion meant that you were Russian religion. But these days, most people who are not religious would even also, according to polls, identify with religion and see themselves as belonging to a certain faith, and in this sense holding a national identity. But that's a point that needs a certain going into deep discussion about how faith promotes identity. We're speaking about religious identity, but we're also speaking about confessional identity, because they're different confessions, see? And say, if you are a non-Orthodox Christian, for example, an evangelical Christian, does it mean that you're not a Russian, that you don't have a Russian identity these days? Of course not. But mostly it's about belonging. Yes, traditionally it's about belonging, say, to the Orthodox religion. In this sense, yes, we're speaking about national identities in the sense of belonging to what Anderson called an imagined community. You're speaking about this. So a nation is an imagined community. Whether it's a community in its own right, and what came first, the state or the nation, is a question that will never be solved, I think, because some scholars think that way and some scholars think the other way around. But basically, it's a question of interaction between the state as a constellation of institutions and a nation as a community leaning on these institutions and interacting with them.
After studying,
organizing its life, that's why I put it this way, organizing its life.
After studying identities and identity policies of Russia and of Europe, what do you think? What's your opinion? Are we that different, Russians and Europeans?
You mean different in what sense? Are we Europeans or what? Of course we are. Of course we are, because it's a common culture we share. Whether it's important or not for people, that's a second point. Whether they would identify more with, say the European culture, or how much they know about European culture, how important it is for them. In the historic sense, of course, we're European, but I think a Eurasian identity, which you probably implicitly refer to, is a social construct. It does not exist in cultural terms. It exists in the minds of philosophers, and to a certain extent, existing in the mind of philosophers, it can be there, but it's a philosophical concept. Whereas when we talk about European identity, or we talk about appropriating European culture, and whether Tolstoy belongs to Russia or Chekhov or Dostoevsky or whoever, of course they do, but they're read by the whole world and by the European world, but not only by the European world. So in this sense, we belong to the European civilization because we have the same roots, but the paths we are following are different. Institutionally, they're different, right? So in this sense.
And speaking about identity politics and identity policies, are they different in Europe and in Russia?
The notion of identity politics is different. Like I was saying, in Europe, it's about minorities promoting their identities. Russian scholars see it in a broader sense. They see this part, which is very important, including ethnic group identity promotion, but they also see a trend of constructing, building, and upkeeping identities on the level of the state, on the level of the local community, etc., etc. These politics can be called, exist in any state, and even the census I was speaking about before, it's a part of this identity politics. I mean, in Britain. So Britain has an identity politics, and it's not only about minority communities. It's also about what British identity actually is. This is a huge question. There was a poll in France like 5 or 6 years ago about what French identity really means. And it brought about divisions in society that did not come to the forefront before. So any community, any state, any institutionalized community, we'll put it this way. In Greek, say the Wallonian community, right, for example, or the Flandrian community, would have an identity politics for upkeeping ties within this particular community. That's also what identity politics is about. And policies are the very specific steps that the state and non-state actors can take to promote these ideas, including putting up symbols or monuments. We were speaking about culture wars before, but before these culture wars started, what happened was that these monuments were put up, and these monuments, as you probably well know, in America, were put up not after the Civil War. They were put up in the beginning of the 20th century mostly, and this fight against them well, say part of seeing identities differently from what the state actually tried to promote at the federal level. See, so but also at the level of the states of the United States. Sorry about this tautology, but I mean that at the federal level they would have one policy. In the southern states they would have a different idea of what their heroes were, and this is what came to the forefront these days. So that's it.
And can these policies and politics help overcome ethnical conflicts, or is there something more important in this sense?
The thing here is, and this is the idea of our very famous ethnologist, Leocadia Drobijo, is that you have to have a positive put together, you have to put together positively ethnic and civic identities. If you find a way to do this, then they can help to overcome these divisions. If they come into conflict, then what happens was that you promote ethnic identity, you use it to political groups use it to political ends, and what then you have is either secession, civil war, or just conflict. So yes, this can be done through language policies, this can be done through cultural policies. I was speaking about Tyrol, which was a good example at this particular stage of development that we are, of say European development that we are at the moment. So hopefully it will go on this way, being to a certain point, and a successful an example of success in this in this area of identity building.
Well, we're speaking already almost an hour. It's time to make some kind of a conclusion. And I would like to ask you to make a forecast. This is the thing that everyone is waiting of an expert. When talking with an expert, everyone wants to know the future. Everyone wants to expert to make a forecast. So we were talking about problems, challenges, and conflicts, and the ways that identity politics and identity policies can help if used properly. So please tell us, what do you think? What of these good possibilities will be used in future, which will help us to make a better future to live in?
I would say what could be used, because I'm not sure that they would be.
Of course, no one is. That's
Yeah,
why we are discussing it.
yes, of course. We at the Institute of World Economy and International Relations have been doing a lot of forecasting over the past decades, and this is one of the main trends of our study. So it's about political forecasting, economic forecasting, and in this sense, you see, you can't forecast a scenario. You can sort of look out for alternatives of development. So it can take this turn, it can take this other turn. This is why I was speaking about responsibility. Depends on whether the elites are responsible, and you were saying how to make them responsible. Well, I would say how would you make them turn an ear to our dialogue? That's the main point. What you can do in this stage is to promote the humanities and to promote humanitarian values, to promote education and the value of cultural values, of culture in general, of say spiritual dialogue, of being responsible. This does not come within one generation. It's work that is needed all over. And what I think is that if education becomes technocratical, and it is becoming technocratical, this is a huge threat. I'm not saying that technologies are not important, they're super important. But the thing is, again, is to find a balance. I mean, you can't be technologically competent in one sphere and not care about the rest of, say, and see no point in understanding how the world is organized. And that people are different, and that the values they hold basically can be different, but there are common values. And these common values, I think that what we can work on is to promote common values between people. And these common values are um, upkeeping, well, seeing solidarity as a need in society, seeing the need to uphold a balance between nature and what people and our technological input. Everybody's speaking about it, but how do you actually do it? How do you promote it into policies? And seeing these values of dialogue as important. If this comes to the forefront, this is not the case at the moment. But if this comes to the forefront, because the world is approaching a certain sort of turning point, and a turning point where there's lots of disintegration. So we were speaking about more cooperation, more interaction, more connectivity, and overcoming alienation. I think the main point is overcoming alienation between people, between states, and between probably the way we see each other. We're very different, but we have common causes. And in this sense, I think that we can work together. And our work together is promoting a common development agenda. This is it. I can't forecast whether this will happen, but I can forecast that the expert community can do a lot to promote this ethical turn. And probably this is it.
Thank you very much, Irina Stanislavovna. I thank you greatly for this discussion, for sharing your opinions with us. I just have to remind all of our viewers and listeners that we were speaking with Irina Semenenko, Doctor of Science, corresponding member of the Russian Academy of Sciences, Deputy Director of the Primakov National Research Institute of World Economy and International Relations, Russian Academy of Sciences. Thank you very much for your time, for your forecast, for your opinions, and yes, I think that you have told maybe the most important thing, that we have to talk to each other, promote dialogue, promote responsibility, and not to turn a deaf ear to ourselves, to our neighbors, and we have to to make something to make future a little bit better. Thank you very much, and
thank you for having me. My pleasure. Thank you.
I hope that we will have a possibility to talk to you again. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.